Folks, if you'll just bear with me for a moment, as you've been doing today, I'm going to read several lines from Sun Tzu because it is part of what we promised to offer you today. Sun Tzu said that the practical art of war, the best thing of all, is to take the enemy's country whole and intact, to shatter and destroy it. It is not so good. It's kind of a different kind of way of speaking here. So too, it is better to recapture an army entire than to destroy it. To capture a regiment, a detachment, or a company entire than to destroy them. And I just want to underscore here, we are not trying to hurt anybody. We are not trying to advocate any sort of violence. When we talk about keeping the enemy intact, we're talking about human beings, Kev and I, that possibly are indwelt or seeking to be indwelt by dark entities, evil entities. These are human beings like the rest of us. They have souls. They're created by God. We're reaching out to you. Those that are watching us that may be opposed to what we're saying, we're reaching out to you as human beings. We are trying to capture you intact. We're trying to capture your souls. We're trying to show you that you know deep down in your heart that you are a creation of God. And you do have a soul, and it is in jeopardy. You've been lied to. You've been deceived by the father of lies. And so we urge you, if you are in these organizations and you recognize that we're not your enemy, we're trying to pull you into the fold under the wings of Jesus Christ. We're trying to show you that you've been lied to. And we're here to say this is the way, this is the path. You have a choice through free will. You can go to the light or you can go to the dark. Unfortunately, those that are opposed to us have chosen to go to the dark side. Sort of a Star Wars scenario there for you, Kev, but we're not trying to hurt anybody. In fact, we're trying to help you. Hence, to fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. This is a spiritual warfare. We want to break the enemy's resistance spiritually. We are bringing to bear a power, a weapon that is greater than any of the technology that is being shared here today. Thus, the highest form of generalship is to balk the enemy's plans. The next best thing is to prevent the junction of the enemy's forces. The next in order is to attack the enemy's army in the field. And the worst policy of all is to besiege walled cities. Elana is a published author and researcher. She's out on the West Coast. I won't disclose your location unless you want to, but you have some publications to your note, and one that's coming up in January, I believe, which is The Space Fence. Please give your background, your CV, your publications, and we will go right ahead. I'm kind of looking at just a few other things from Kev Baker here, my producer, but we're ready for your CV, so go ahead and welcome and thank you. I appreciate you being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's a real honor to be with people who understand the spiritual situation we're in today, and that you all are such deep Christians. I truly appreciate that. I also appreciate that we can come together on these webinars to share what we're doing, because it can sometimes be, for me anyway, a very isolating, sort of lonely journey to continue to find out what's going on in this national security technology. It is not an open book, and it requires much thinking and much consideration and much reading. So I really appreciate the work that all of the participants today are doing on that. Yes, that is the cover of the book. I want to read much of what I have to say because it's quite detailed, and I want to be as correct as possible. I see my role today as bringing you an aspect of what we're seeing as geoengineering to show you that it has to do with space. And therefore it is entirely military. This has been, I've been sort of felt anyway, like the lone voice in the desert for the years I've been in this movement, since 2012, to bring in the military picture. It's very important to not ignore or avoid this. It's really been driven home to me the last couple of weeks. I've been on a lot of radio interviews because of what was going on down off the coast of Texas in the Gulf, and now off the East Coast. So these weather events are crucial to understand contextually, and it isn't just weather engineering, and I hope to show you that today. So I'll start by reading what I presented as an introduction in San Francisco at a conference a month or two ago. We are living in a strange science fiction time. Issues upon which the future welfare of the earth and its peoples hinge are marginalized as conspiracy theory, and scientists and doctors who step forward to sound the alarm are discredited, ostracized, or killed. High-tech research is dominated by military and defense corporation grant monies, compartmentalization and need-to-know security clearance, and non-disclosure agreements signed in blood, while the good old boy peer review system plays gatekeeper. Divide and hide is the name of the national security information game. Despite the mis- and disinformation that must be waded through, the internet is our only town square and university all wrapped in one for researchers probing beneath the national security shroud thrown over full-spectrum dominance technologies coming online daily at a pace that defies reason. What university could one turn to for the kind of information we need in order to comprehend what the national security state is up to, especially now that universities themselves have been militarized? My work is to frame the context of how all the pieces fit together and what they say about the future that is already here. Like the Egyptian myth of Isis and Osiris that Freemasons are so fond of, the body parts of an ancient globalist dream of domination lie scattered over the internet, awaiting our ability to piece it all together and interpret what has been hidden from we the people. The way our minds work is to first compartmentalize issues in order to concentrate on them one by one. Our next effort must be to discern if and how the separate issues are connected, possibly by a common intent. For example, how CERN, ionospheric heaters, and wind turbines are all calibrated by artificial intelligence to work together. The issues that goad us to act beyond our personal lives are simply separate battlefields in a vast spiritual war for the future of humanity and the definition of life itself. Extreme weather, vaccinations, GMOs, water quality, immune system degeneration, dying animal species, acid oceans, and alkalinized soil, mind control and targeting are all occurring simultaneous with the moral degeneration of society. The death of the middle-class dream, the rise of Agenda 2030, artificial intelligence, neuroscience, and transhumanism. All are parts of the elite Luciferian dream known as globalism. Geoengineering the Earth's atmosphere is not just about weather, wireless communication, drones, and directed energy weapons. It is about aiding in the breakdown of the immune system so that the human being and all life on Earth can be genetically altered. From here on out, we must learn to think in terms of a big picture. In his 2012 book, Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, Joseph P. Farrell quotes General of the Army Douglas MacArthur in his farewell speech, Duty, Honor, Country, at West Point, May 12, 1962. General MacArthur definitely was privy to the big military picture. Quoting, "We deal now not with things of this world alone, but with the illimitable distances and as yet unfathomed mysteries of the universe. We are reaching out for a new and boundless frontier. We speak in strange terms of harnessing cosmic energy, of making winds and tides work for us, of creating unheard of synthetic materials to supplement or even replace our old standard basics, to purify seawater for our drink, of mining ocean floors for new fields of wealth and food, of disease preventatives to expand life into the hundreds of years, of controlling the weather for a more equitable distribution of heat and cold, of rain and shine, of spaceships to the moon, of the primary target in war no longer limited to the armed forces of an enemy, but instead to include his civil populations, of ultimate conflict between a united human race and the sinister forces of some other planetary galaxy, of such dreams and fantasies as to make life the most exciting of all times." End of General MacArthur's quote. The most exciting of all times may also be the most dangerous. MacArthur was not waxing eloquent beyond military interests. He was already looking through the lens of the military doctrine of full-spectrum dominance, essential to the space age of Nikola Tesla and James Clerk Maxwell, not Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein. A space age not of the law of conservation of energy, but of torsion fields, rotating plasmas transducing zero-point energy, manipulating the local fabric of space-time, wielding longitudinal scalar waves and interferometry weapons, such as we saw on 9/11 and didn't know what we were looking at. Warfare is now asymmetrical, and physics is now nonlinear. After Donald Trump was elected, one of outgoing President Obama's last acts was to strike the word limited from the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, and thus publicly reinstate the Star Wars program of 33 years ago. And here I'm quoting from, from Zero Hedge. Republican Congressman Trent Franks, who introduced and shepherded the policy changes in the House, said he drew inspiration from former President Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative of the 1980s, which was intended to use lasers and other space-based weaponry to render nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. Known as Star Wars, the initiative cost taxpayers $30 billion in 1980 money, but no system was ever deployed. That was in December 2016 that the word unlimited was taken out of the NDAA. The following month, the CIA-controlled mainstream media began normalizing geoengineering, the covert aerial, chemical, and biological delivery system that had already been going on for 2 decades. The British Guardian lied that Solar Shield, as they were calling it now, would be, quote, the first time ever for research into geoengineering, end of quote. In May 2017, NASA announced that a massive human-made barrier surrounds the Earth, a humongous bubble we created out of space, deserving of calling for a whole new geological epoch to be named after us, namely anthropogenic. And here I quote from Science Alert. Recently, the Van Allen probes detected something strange as they monitored the activity of charged particles caught within Earth's magnetic field. These dangerous solar discharges were being kept at bay by some kind of low-frequency barrier. A certain type of communications called very low frequency, VLF, radio communications have become far more common now than in the 60s, and the team at NASA confirmed that they can influence how and where certain particles in space move about. One way of looking at this humongous VLF bubble around the planet is that we have created a Tesla dome around us, an electromagnetic Tesla dome. Another way of looking at it is that this will constitute a large part of the intelligence of the space fence. On June 17, the AMC-9 satellite in geostationary orbit 36,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface lost contact with its Luxembourg-based operator and began drifting and breaking up. Radar revealed 3 orb-like objects flying in triangular formation near the satellite, with another orb trailing aft. Media concentrated on the breakup debris and not on the possibility that the satellite was breaking up because it had been attacked. 2 weeks after this space incident, President Trump relaunched the National Space Council that had guided NASA in 1958 to 1973 and again in 1989 to 1993. After its relaunch, the revised NDAA was passed by Congress. Tucked in the monster bill was a proposal endorsed by the House Armed Services Committee to create a Space Corps as a 6th military branch. Now we can turn to the space fence itself. Originally, it was a string of radar installations across the continental United States under the aegis of the SDI Star Wars program that had been tabled until Bernard Eastland's 1987 patent for HARP cleared the way to develop a 24/7 ionized atmosphere. In 2012, CNN described the space fence as, quote, a series of radar signals managed by the Air Force since the early 60s that has been tracking an ever-growing pile of rocket and satellite parts and other man-made fragments that zoom around Earth's vicinity at thousands of miles per hour, end of quote. 5 years later, 2017 now, we still hear very little about the space fence and its massive defense contractor Lockheed Martin, other than that construction is going on in the Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands that will help count space debris. But the space fence is about far more than counting space debris, though it is definitely about keeping NATO orbital satellites safe. A more apt clue as to what the space fence is up to might be Jade Helm, the military exercise in the American Southwest run in 2015 by artificial intelligence, or AI. Jack Cruz, a doctor in New Orleans, was on the mark when he wrote in March 2017, and I quote, "The deception of solar radiation management, now known as solar shield, is quite varied in many areas of science, politics, warfare, communication, and technology industries today. Human stock markets have created these industries, and now the entire human system of society is based upon these technologies. This is why the unripe mind blames food for man's current ills and fails to make the links back to altered light spectrums caused by man's creations. All food takes the lead from photosynthesis and the proper solar connections and spectral density. He who controls the electromagnetic spectrum on Earth controls the living things on the surface of the planet. Digital heroin," I think he means addiction to the digital technologies, "leads to people craving man-made carbohydrates, opiates, and technology. We wonder why burying the sun has led to mankind's decline, because we never sit down and put the story in proper sequence." End of quote. Space fence operations, to begin with, absolutely depend upon the weather engineering that we're now seeing. It was the very first operation listed by independent scientist Clifford Carnicom in his 2005 film called Cloud Cover. I just want people to be able to see the list and really make it indelible on your minds so that you understand all that I'm going to be saying, because we're not going to have the list much longer. All right, so let's begin with weather engineering, geoengineering. I won't talk much about it because Dane Wigington is going to cover that. A brief definition: chemical/electromagnetic creation of plasma cirrus cloud cover. A conductive C4 atmosphere. C4, as was said by the previous speaker, command control, communications, and cyber warfare. And the third part so the first part is chemical electromagnetic creation of plasma cirrus cloud cover. The second is to make a conductive C4 atmosphere for all of those 4 elements of military operations. And then the third, to produce a matrix for building and steering extreme weather events, such as we've been witnessing lately. Geoengineering the sky and weather is not just about disaster capitalism, weather derivative, and hedge fund profit mop-ups. It is the sine qua non of every other military intelligence space age operation going on in our atmosphere. And now if you could bring up the second graphic, Jim Lee's climateviewer.org sky heater map. Yes, if you go to climateviewer.org, you listeners, you can see Jim Lee's masterpiece. He's always tweaking it and adding new things. Now, after weather engineering, I'm now on the second operation, the planetary/geophysical operations. In Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, written in 2012, Joseph P. Farrell spells out Soviet astronomer Nikolai Kardashev's 3 phases of technological achievement for any civilization aspiring to a space age. Number 1, full spectrum dominance, planetary control. Number 2, control over one's star and its systems. And number 3, control over one's galaxy and its systems. So obviously, at least to me, our civilization is working on phases 1 and 2. Now, I've listed, I didn't have room to put it up on for a graphic, but listen carefully. I have 4 points here of what is going on planetarily as far as geophysical operations, all of it stimulated by the weather events, all of it ionizing, keeping the atmosphere ionized for these operations. The first one I list is to manipulate the ionosphere to charge, build, and steer storms over and around Earth regions. So that's very important, and that is a planetary operation. To utilize droughts, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes for environmental modification and disaster capitalist profits. That's very important. So to use disasters as a way to make money, that is very attractive to those who have a lot of money and want more. The third point I listed is earth harvesting for real estate investment trusts, REITs. And I took that idea from Catherine Austin Fitts in her interviews regarding the breakaway civilization and how it is supporting itself. And the fourth would be sun simulation and solar experiments. And this may sound extraordinarily outrageous and unbelievable, but I do believe that the sun itself is being manipulated, is being experimented with. And I always think of what Tesla said to make it sound not so impossible. Tesla said, quote, "Man could trap the breast of Mother Sun and release her energy toward Earth as needed, magnetic as well as light." And I believe that this is going on now. For the third operation that I listed, electromagnetic operations, this is huge, and I'm not going to be able to do all of it justice. Our lives are immersed in the electromagnetic operations for full spectrum dominance, planetary control. Once we begin to list the battle space array of electromagnetic technology around us on the Earth, in near Earth orbit, and in space, the list is truly staggering. On land, we have wireless computers and their routers, wireless iPhones and 5G millimeter wave antennas, cell towers, Gwen towers, power lines and phased arrays in neighborhoods, smart meters, the Internet of Things, NexRads near radio stations, WASAC, wet surface air cooler steam release from industry and nuclear power plants, and U.S. Navy and merchant ships offshore, mobile and stationary ionospheric heaters, radar installations on every military base on Earth, fiber optic cable, particle accelerators like CERN, cloud seeding and ionization pluviculture corporations, wind farms, fracking wells, RFIDs in products and people, remote neural monitoring and brain-computer interface, etc. In near-Earth orbit and space, we have orbiting and geostationary satellites armed to the teeth with surveillance and directed energy weapons in the name of weather detection and media connectivity, sounding rockets spewing dusty plasma, smart dust and sensors, and sundry experiments in space, on the moon and sun, all directed by and run through quantum computers engaged in their own artificial intelligence evolution that runs counter to ours. That we live in the midst of the sentient world simulation mentioned earlier, quietly built around us in the name of comfort and convenience and communication. This fact has escaped most of us, given the busyness of our lives. This ignorance must be corrected, however, as any soldier or general on a battlefield knows. It is also essential to a meaningful life to educate oneself about where and when one really lives, especially when all of life, including our bodies and brains, is so vulnerable to the resonance that is under assault from wireless frequencies capable of being intentionally pulsed to achieve psychological and physical effects. Our planet's Schumann resonance of 7.83 Hertz is being changed. Could this be about the singularity or transhumanist future that global elites like Ray Kurzweil and Google's Singularity University are herding us toward? So I've only named a few of the electronic events going on, perhaps experimentally, in our atmosphere thanks to the constant ionizing of our sky. The first one I name is to utilize extreme electrical weather events, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, etc., to keep the atmosphere charged. For all of these weather events are electrical in nature. The second one I name is plasma and antimatter farming. And this farming of antimatter, I mean, I always think of Tony Patch as being the man to go to understand what is going on with antimatter. And plasma is endless. As we see we're seeing lightning originating from the earth up, very, very new. And that is definitely about the plasma in our atmosphere. The man-made Birkeland currents at the poles, the Alvin Whistler waves, the rotating electrical fields, the Hutchison effect, all of these are being experimented with in our now plasma-rich ionized atmosphere. The rotating plasma, the last one I want to name is the rotating plasma under stress to convert transverse waves into longitudinal scalar waves and vice versa. I don't have time today to go into scalar technology that I'm still learning about, but suffice it to say that all of the ionosphere Keter technology that is now being used in a warlike way, whether it's weather warfare or otherwise, it's all scalar technology, which is all about Tesla and other science that was buried at the turning of the 19th into the 20th century. And I say buried because I think what happened is it was tucked away for the use of power mongers. And now that the atmosphere is ionized, it's being brought forth with a vengeance. Now, Tony, could you put up the third graphic that I have? And we can keep that up because it's quite interesting. Here's what I say about it. This purported photo of 3 plasma tubes. You can see them, 1, 2, 3, one is larger than the others, connecting space with our lower atmosphere. At the University of Sydney, Cleo Loy was a graduate student, and she was able to use the Murchison Wide Field Array radio telescope to probe the magnetosphere, which, if people don't know, have the ionosphere and the plasmasphere nestled inside of it. By splitting the observations between the eastern and western ends of the array, she was able to achieve a binocular vision and allowing us to see these plasma tubes in 3 dimensions. So they are quite extraordinary, and I must admit I do think a lot about these because plasma is the name of the game now, and plasma physics is all the rage. Another electrical event that could be important in this, in how our ionized atmosphere is being used, is holographs. Some people around the earth, usually in developing countries, I notice these experiments are being run, are seeing extraordinary entities in the skies. It could be religious images. It could be UFO, alien images, but holography, 3D, does very well with scalar technology in a plasma-rich environment. So that's something else to be aware of when you see signs and wonders, the latest Roman circus in the skies. It may not be a planet, it may not be a true double sun, it may not be what it appears to be, but something being conducted in the atmosphere. And the last, also extraordinary, I must mention, are the electrical ability of exotic propulsion systems. A lot of people are seeing triangular ships hiding in cirrus cloud cover. They might see something else running through the atmosphere. It could be physical. It also could be a plasma formation that has been created with radio frequency, and they drawn together some of the plasma in the atmosphere and given it a shape with a laptop from a guy sitting in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I don't know. But I do know that exotic propulsion systems do exist, and they are under deep cover, and it behooves us to know that the plasma environment in our atmosphere may be part of the story that we're actually seeing. Next, and this is a good segue, the exotic propulsion systems, I segue into the fourth operation, which is directed energy warfare. And this is truly C4 to every extent. The revolution in military affairs that occurred in the 90s, by the way, has irrevocably changed the nature of warfare. As I hinted earlier with the words asymmetric warfare and nonlinear physics. Warfare is now about full spectrum dominance of both the electromagnetic spectrum and the cultural civilian spectrum as well. Instabilities of systems are identified, whether of a nation or an individual, after which the weaknesses are exploited by means of resonant effects, meaning remote application of electromagnetic signatures, pulses, and frequencies. This is the new warfare. And one of the things I list under the DEWs, the directed energy weapons operations, scalar interferometry of ionospheric heaters, lasers and masers, particle beam weapons, high-powered microwaves, etc. So if I have time at the end, I'll go through that and talk about it a little more if there are questions. The next one that I list is a sort of sleeper, I think, but it's about cloaking. There are a lot of people seeing, for example, some chemical trails being laid, but there seems to be no jet in front of it. And my guess is that's being cloaked because the cloaking technology is quite extraordinary and can use the plasma cloud cover for cloaking as well. And it can even, some of these, I don't know what they are, that are up in the sky because you can see certain actions flowing from them. I assume they're cloaked, but they can also produce their own plasma. And then the third one, and I just talked about it, the detection and obscuration of exotic propulsion systems. Yes, that there are sometimes triangular and other shaped entities behind some of the plasma cloud cover being laid. And what I'm saying is that this may be yet another intent behind the chemical trails and the cirrus, the so-called cirrus cloud cover that we're seeing. I hope people can read that. It looks really tiny where I am. But this has to do with nanotechnology, and James Barrett, in his 2013 book, Our Final Invention, Artificial Intelligence and the End of the Human Era, wrote the following, and I think I cannot stress this enough. Quote, repurposing the world's molecules using nanotechnology has been dubbed ecophagy. I don't know if I'm saying that right, ecophagy, which means to eat the environment, end of quote. Nanoparticles are, this includes smart dust, it includes and I'll go into it in the next section, the things dropping on us, the heavy metals, is the first thing that most people think of. So that's why I put this up. This was primarily from Billy Hayes. He gave this to me years ago, and I still use it. And I can read from it around the world. I probably should make this bigger if I only knew how to do this technology better. I'm so not with this. Okay, there, this is better. Around the world, installations in service to the space fence are all digitally calibrated to one another. Digital wireless technology in an atmosphere constantly ionized by conductive metal nanoparticles is turning our soil alkaline and our oceans and blood acidic. The conductive aluminum nanoparticles falling from the sky and being drilled into the earth are for military industrial intelligence agendas of control. So here I have barium nitrate plus aluminum oxide plus iron oxide plus oxygen is shown as increased in the atmosphere hours after chemical contamination by spraying. Okay, that's not the only genesis of this combination, and I'm primarily showing this to draw your attention to how there are multiple systems delivering this combination, and we can discuss why. In fact, I don't have GMOs on this, but I tend to think they too have the same combination in them. So then the second one, I'm talking about what is used in the perforations of oil well casings prior to fracking and is forced into the well by C4 ignition. That's a type of, what's the word I want? An explosive. Okay, so this is aluminum, iron oxide again, and you see how it's changing chemically. Okay, so that's the same as in what is being sprayed or what is coming from the combustion engines of jets, however you want to look at it. And the third one is the sounding rockets being fired off. They too leave tons of very similar chemical composition, chemical signature in their trail from their rocket fuel. Billy Hayes says with every orbital launch, 20 to 120 tons of aluminum particulates are dumped per year with the exhaust plume into our upper atmosphere and into orbit, much of which eventually filters down, and as we now know, most of us, filters down in a nanoparticle scale to be breathed by us. And we breathe this in, and it immediately goes into our blood through our wonderful oxygen carbon dioxide exchange, and eventually ends up going through our blood-brain barrier. A lot of the what is it called? The autoimmune diseases that are happening now are definitely affected by this because we have been breathing this for 20 years now. So if you are aware of this, I'm sure that you're doing what you can, perhaps having your blood tested, just doing some sort of purge now and then in order to get heavy metals out of your system. We've already seen how this is tied to Alzheimer's, autism, etc. And so this is very serious, but what I wanted to show you from this little bit of text that I use in my PowerPoint presentations is that there are three known delivery systems that Billy Hayes has informed me of, and that is through what's coming down from the jets, from fracking in the wells, because those two are electronically triggered, right? And that's why we have earthquakes that surround fracking wells. And then the third delivery system is the sounding rockets. And I'm sure there are more. And the one I would add now, and perhaps I'll revise this, but I would need to do the research and nail it down, are the vaccinations. So that's that. And then for the rest of my stressing of the importance of this nanoparticulate technology, I have a little piece here that Patrick Roddy sent out on the magnetite nanoparticles in our brains. And this is magnetite. This would be another one showing up in massive quantities in the brain. And then David Keith even talked about it in his 2010 paper, David Keith being the geoengineer trotted out whenever the word geoengineering has to be supported in the press. David Keith, his paper was Photophoretic Levitation of Engineered Aerosols for Geoengineering. So these magnetite nanoparticles, along with aluminum, barium, and titanium, they're all showing up in rainwater samples. So add the magnetite to it as well. And then I wanted to see, let's see, I've got a couple others. I've got the paper, his paper, and then the smart dust has entered this tiny implants. This is a real sleeper, because coming down from the sky are the metals, as I've said, but also coming down in that same nanoparticle scale are other experiments, biological, certainly fungus, and I'm assuming that the fungus would be from the upper atmosphere, where these the chemical trails are initially laid, and then slowly the nanoparticles filter down into our atmosphere and we breathe them. So fungus, Clifford Carnicom has done a great deal of work on Morgellons, which he has renamed the cross-domain bacteria. I'll talk about that in a moment. But what I want to say here is that too is on a nanoscale. And for nanoscale, you would need extremely expensive equipment in order to see it, because it is smaller than a micron. And this nanotechnology, I have a whole chapter devoted to it in the upcoming book on the space fence, Under an Ionized Sky, because it is so crucial. It's in our foods. Yes, nanoparticles in our foods, GMO foods, of course. It's filtering down from the sky, so it's falling on organic foods that are growing in the open air. It's in our water supply. It's in cosmetics that women put on their faces. It's in powders that we put on babies. It's everywhere, and it does not need to be listed as an ingredient. So this nanoscale, and I remind you of the quote that I read at the beginning, that when he says that when James Barrett says that it's repurposing the world's molecules and is ecophagy, meaning eating the environment. It is eating our environment. This is not only are the smart dust smart, in the sense that they must have microprocessors in them. They have a certain signature, which is electrically conductive. So they are able, that we're breathing in sensors that are on a nanoscale. I mean, that's open press. NASA's release of trillions and trillions of sensors in the upper atmosphere, many of which are down here and many of which we breathe. All of these are electrically plugged in, if you will, to this SWS that we mentioned earlier. So just so we understand that the nanoparticles themselves are part of plugging us in to an AI-run virtual world. And with that, I'll go on to the next part, the final one that I have, the final operation. I think it's the 6th operation, is the biological transhumanism operations. This is, I've already mentioned the hive mind Morgellons deliveries by all of the above. I don't know, maybe the rocket fuel has it in it too, but certainly the chemical trails do. When Clifford Carnicom first was doing that work at the end of the 1990s and early 2000s, and you can see all of his papers at his site, carnicominstitute.org, many, many papers. He was collecting the detritus coming down from the chemical trails seen in the azure blue skies of northern New Mexico. He was collecting them with a HEPA filter, and then of course collecting condensation from the rain, etc., and analyzing everything to a T that he could with the equipment he had. And the Morgellons are definitely, they come as fibers, but the fiber itself has 5 components to it. And I talk about that in chapter 8 of my last book, Chemtrails, HARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth. I give that entire chapter over to Clifford, to analyzing Clifford's many, many papers and sort of getting it down to where people would read it. So what do I mean by hive mind? I mean that Morgellons, it has an electro-optical nature component. It has a chemical signature. It certainly can shapeshift. We've seen that. It can look like an insect. It can look like, I have an amazing video, which I do not think is a CGI doctored video, of it looking like a tiny elf or something. I don't even know the word for it. So it has many characteristics that have been genetically instilled into it. It was engineered. It's called the cross-domain bacteria because it really crosses all 3 domains of life on Earth. And so the biological transhumanism operations behind this seem evident to me. We have these in us now. We've breathed in the smart dust. We're breathing in sensors. We're breathing in microprocessors, all on a nanoscale. All can be communicated with. They are transmitters. They are receivers. So this is how we're being plugged in to an AI world, is how I see it. The nanoparticle delivery, I just named it, then this will enable remote genetic engineering of our DNA. In fact, that's how I look at 5G, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Tony talk this afternoon about that. And the end result of this appears to be to replace nature with virtual reality. And I'm just have read Ray Kurzweil's 2005 book, For a Dose of Transhumanism. And I would say that this is absolutely true, that nature is to be replaced with virtual reality, which is why there is no, I don't think that any of these brilliant but heartless and possibly soulless scientists and the global elites they work for I don't think they really care how many people die, or how many forests die, or how many species die. I actually think they welcome the opportunity to be able to create their own creations and be as gods on this planet. I think that the solar radiation, that solar rays that we depend on from our star, are being blocked in order to, and our night skies are being obscured to cut off our relationship with this divine cosmos. I think it all boils down to replacing what is natural with what is virtual. And Tony, could you bring up the final photo of my book cover? Yes, and so here in the book cover, the book will be out in January, Under an Ionized Sky, From Chemtrails to Space Fence Lockdown. You notice that the Earth is surrounded by a Saturn-like ring, and this is key to to understand on a physical level. First of all, the sounding rockets heading skyward, heading into near-Earth orbit, and then running experiments up there, whatever they say is going on, and then coming back down. They are spewing a chemical signature trail, very similar to what is being dropped by jets, and those chemicals, particularly aluminum oxide, lithium, these are highly conductive, lithium being perhaps the most conductive, but more expensive, and up into near-Earth orbit, where the centrifugal force of the Earth begins to spin them around and around, and eventually they will settle down around the equator as a Saturn-like ring. And this has multiple purposes, as do all of the operations that I've named today. The ring around the Earth, besides the fact that it brings many questions regarding Saturn's rings, the actual rings around Saturn, it is obviously for a space fence lockdown, and that's how I view it. I've tried to point out in this talk the many things on the Earth that enclose us and capture us in an electromagnetic Tesla dome, in a way. And I actually have a picture that I could show of the series that didn't seem to last very long on television. I don't own a television, but it was called Under the Dome. And I felt that that was very much pre-programming us to know our condition in an entertainment way. Entertainment is a much better way to control people, by the way, than the Soviet hammer and sickle. So imagine that you see that those rings are made of just nanoparticles, trillions, I don't know the term, of nanoscale conductive metals. And they're rotating with our Earth rotating, and they're around the equator. And what they do is they form a communication, I don't know the word, disc, CD disc, that is collecting information, is transmitting information, is possibly recording and storing information. Yes, it's like a CD-ROM around the planet. And this can be used for control over planet Earth, because, as I said earlier, it appears that control of our solar system is definitely an objective to this next phase of the ionizing of the sky happened through Bernard Eastland's patent the HARP experiments that ran for 15 years, very successful, bringing ionized energy down into planet Earth to make our atmosphere a sort of mini ionosphere for military objectives. And now the next phase is coming of the space fence. And this has all been built around and under us very quietly in terms of our convenience and communication and our entertainment and all that. But it is really about this next phase of dominating our particular our planetary system. And so this ring around the planet, this CD-ROM space fence around the planet, will be also not just useful for controlling planet Earth and everybody on it, and producing a less vulnerable species, perhaps, that would be a cyborg, a species connected to brain-computer interface, BCI, but will also be useful for communicating with various vessels going out into the solar system for industry, for pioneering, taking people off planet, etc. The only question I have for that one, because so far all I've seen are machines going up because of the Van Allen belts. And the Van Allen belts are, to my knowledge, still there, still exuding massive radiation, still requiring that we, in our vulnerable body species anyway, that we be able to lead line our spacesuits, our vessels. So I must admit that at this point, I don't think that the idea is that the human being as we are now will be the one that will be going out into space and forming colonies and running factories for industry and making money or whatever we have then. So that's still a question to me. Will it be an AI being that goes out that doesn't have to worry about a delicate nature-built body? I don't know. Will it simply be the mind? Will be so harnessed that it will be able to, with whatever subtle body it will require, will be able to go off planet and go and do these things? I don't know. That would be something that Clyde Lewis, in talking about the occult, may have a clue to. But however it works, this is the important part to understand, that the ionized atmosphere was first and the space fence is next. And after this, I am going to write one more book, which will be about synthetic biology. And then that trilogy done, I feel that I will have given it my best, barring some new revelation that comes afterward. But what I most want to protect is humanity. And this is my key concept to leave with you, is this is about our planet. Our planet and the human being are absolutely united. The destiny, I feel, the destiny of our planet has to do with our destiny, and our destiny has to do with the destiny of the planet. So this is why I devote so much of my life to this, is to get that information out. And I'm sure there are much better qualified people to do this in a scientific sense. I only have a biology background, but I have to do it, just like I'm sure Tony feels and all the other participants of this conference feel. We must make a stand. And with that, I thank you for listening to me, and I'm ready to field questions or whatever, Tony, you want.
Thank you, Elana. I'm going to get back in front of the camera here and speak with you. Thank you very much. Very well thought out and presented body of work. I encourage people to purchase your book, purchase your upcoming book as well. Do you have a website? I thought you had a website. but I'm remiss in recalling what it is. So can you cite
Yeah.
that?
Yes, there's one underway, elanafreeland.com, where people could actually, I've been getting some emails there. I have a separate email account there, and I do go to it. And it's still in process, because the person doing this is doing it for free for me, bless her heart. And, you know, we're back and forth. But yes, elanafreeland.com.
Is there an email if you would like to be contacted with questions from people who have listened to you today and would like to pose questions that, unfortunately, we don't have the ability to interact with the chat room due to some limitations, so maybe some interaction through email, if you would be so kind?
Yeah, Tony, I think they should go to that elanafreeland.com, and then the email is there. And
Okay.
truthfully, I don't know it by heart. I might.
That's all right.
Yeah, it's something. Oh, yes, here it is. It's called protonmail.com. And I just don't know what my particular one is. That's how ignorant I am of this technology.
That's okay. Not a problem. One of the questions that we have seen in the chat room that I'll toss to you regarding your rings around the Earth, which obviously is similar to Saturn, if not the same, at least in its form. Do you see a connection between this ring? Because I don't think it was necessarily just a creative moment on your part. I think there's some deliberate methodology behind your madness. Is there a connection between what you're displaying with Earth rings and Saturn itself that maybe you'd like to share with the audience, or maybe not?
Well, you know, you and Kev talked about Saturn and the Saturnine brotherhoods, and I'm hoping that Clyde is going to cover some of that, though I'm not sure he knows about that aspect. No, I do see it very much. I see NASA. Now we'll get into my own occult thoughts, because I do have thoughts on this. And I see NASA as being completely a Saturnine brotherhood. It was founded by Nazis. It was founded primarily by Werner von Braun, an SS Nazi, under, and he was here before he came over in 1945. He was here in the 1930s, and he was working with Goddard down in Texas and or the New Mexico, whichever, and with Jack Parsons in California, who was the head of the Church of Satan, or I guess it was the OTO, which was Crowley's outfit. Our entire rocket program was ensconced in a satanic brotherhoods, and the fact that this has been buried, and then we have this NASA, which is not at all what it seems to be. I'm convinced of it. I just haven't had the opportunity yet. I've been sort of, Tony, you know this, I've been doing the nuts and bolts of how the system works, because that's how my mind works. My mind works, okay, I need to know how the system works so that I can see the underpinnings that are not being discussed, and those are always spiritual. They're always spiritual. There is no such thing. It's like people say, well, I like public education because it's, it doesn't have a religious twist. Well, it does have a religion. You can't get away from the spiritual aspects of any of this. But for the way my mind works, I need to understand the systems first. Then I can go into the underpinnings. And as you know, I've been I've studied Rudolf Steiner for years, because Steiner was the one who, not only was he a Christian who understood the nature of Christ, but he also wanted to bring back together in our minds, to erase the black line between science and spirit, and bring them back together to show how they talk to each other. And wow, we need that more than anything now. It isn't just enough for a scientist to have his science and then he goes to church on Sunday. He's got to be able to merge the two. And this is how I see the elites who are running this show. They know this is true, and they do it. They have it all merged, but they educate all of us to keep them separate, church and state, et cetera, et cetera. So we have this dualistic mind, and we end up in cognitive dissonance because, how can we combine these two seemingly opposing elements? But they are not, and that's why I say NASA, Saturnine Brotherhood, Mithraism in the military, all of these brotherhoods have spiritual underpinnings that we are taught to not think of, and that's their First Amendment right, and they get to be in the army and be a Satanist like Michael Aquino was for many years. We need to look at this as part of the data to understanding the beast. That's a bottom line. And I just don't talk about it much not because I'm hiding it, but because I haven't had the time yet I need to do the systems first, then I will have the time to do the spiritual, to talk in a spiritual manner. And I'm really happy you invited me today because, we only had that breakfast together in Olympia once and enabled where we were able to talk about our spiritual lives. And I definitely feel, I hope, that everything I do, certainly on the air and radio shows, etc., you have me. This is no mask. This is me. And the spiritual part of me is informing everything else that I do. There is no division in me, but I just don't talk about it in those terms yet because I haven't had the time to really do a thorough job.
Sure. And I appreciate your candor on that. And it is really our mission, our mandate, is to show the occulted spiritual side of this. And it doesn't mean that we're practitioners of the occult. It doesn't mean that we're advocates of it. It's simply that is the root of all of the technology. And so we need to shed light on that. And that's also why we invited Clyde Lewis to come on and speak to that, as you mentioned. And tomorrow, Kathleen Urquhart will be here to carry that spiritual side further forward in the development of our discussion of that, because that's where I hope that these continuing and hopefully a little more sophisticated on the technical side of our production, that these webinars move forward so that we have that opportunity for the audience to hear the spiritual aspect. Because yes, the cognitive dissonance that is there is purposeful so that we do not see what has been occulted. By definition, it's been hidden. Yeah. And that is their purpose because they view it as their power base. And that denies us access to the power that they are accessing. Now, I think you'll agree with me, we don't want to access what they are accessing because it is not a benevolent source of information. It is supposed to be information denied to us to protect us. And we see much of the negative implications of technology, and we're shedding, as you say, getting into the nuts and bolts of the technology. We understand the inherent dangers that those systems, multiple systems, pose to us as a biological life form, but also dangerous to us in our spirit. Mm-hmm. Because they're attacking our souls. And we know the root.
And they have a very different idea of what is human and what they want as human. I mean, this is what Steiner told me, and I heard the clarion call. He said that you will be forced in the 21st century to name evil. It will not be enough to be protected from it anymore. You must name it. And for that, I have to find out its ways without entering into it. And I think you and I are in complete agreement on that.
Yep. And again, I didn't read your portion. I thought we were a little behind schedule, so I sort of abbreviated. But getting back to this, this whole concept of the art of war, when you say that you have to name evil, I mean, that's the essence of warfare, is to identify your enemy, call it out, but also, and we'll maybe get into this a little bit tomorrow, you have to have spies in place. Now, you and I are not human intelligence officers by any stretch of the imagination, so far as the intelligence communities are concerned. But I would offer this to those in the audience that might be in that arena. Stay quiet about it. If you are a benevolent person, if you are a kind person, if you are worried about our souls and our existence, stay quiet, stay undercover, do your work, and feed information to people like yourself, myself, that you're able to. I'm not saying secrets, state secrets. I'm just saying, let us know. Let us know what you know to your degree of comfort level, not to jeopardize yourself. But even if you don't communicate with us, because we don't want to be targets, we're already targets, but we don't want to enhance that. But work within your organization to gather information that perhaps you can find a channel to send that information forward, to work from within, to change the tide. Because Sun Tzu says that and this isn't the end all, it's just an example, but he stipulates that the greatest weapon that you have in warfare is intelligence gathered through spies. Now, this is a complete departure from what you're talking about. I'm just kind of tossing that out there for the sake of letting people know where we're going tomorrow in the discussion, because that's a component of it. But getting back on track with what you've been doing, do you have a sense of, in the broader scheme of things, how much time we have left as human beings? If these are existential threats, when is the tipping point? I've posed this to Dane Wigington before, and I'm sure you know his answer to this, but do you view a tipping point in which there is no point? We've reached that point of no return? I don't want to take away hope, but how far along are we going to this end point of humanity?
Well, yeah, and I think I do have a bit of a different take on this.
Yeah.
I definitely believe that there is a spiritual world that is extremely interested in our difficult journey of learning to evolve as human beings, spiritual beings in bodies. This is not easy to be on planet Earth. There's a part of us that is not just the brain, not just the body. It is a spiritual being, an eternal spiritual being. And the spiritual world, and there are, to me, it isn't just a monolithic God or just Christ that Christ permeates this entire solar system. I know that, but I perceive that the spiritual world has many benign beings in it somehow. I don't really understand that, but they will not allow things to go beyond a certain point. I think the flood of Noah reveals that. But we are free will beings, and they will not intercede until we have made our best efforts. And that's how I see my life. I'm making my best efforts, and that's my job. And the fact that I've been very influenced by Rudolf Steiner in many ways, but in one of them that I really, really like is I've always been sort of a prodigy as a kid, and intelligence has been something I'm very familiar with. My father was a scientist for Navy intelligence, which I think destroyed him, but he was a brilliant man. And my intelligence was in my head, and my heart had a big wall between it. And then I did self-healing work, and now my heart and my head work together. And I'm a a whole composite now. And I believe, my experience is that if I can get these clear concepts and this sharp definition of concepts and build as sharp a picture as I possibly can for people with my ability to write and speak, then that is lifting my thoughts into the divine. And I don't see it as my intellect. This is a different kind of thinking I do. It's not just my intellect. My intellect is my dog, my faithful dog, trotting on behind me. But with my spirit involved in this, I am able to lift my thoughts to where those in the spiritual world can also commune with me. And this is what they wait for. This is how I see it. They wait for us to lift our thoughts away from, I have to pick up milk before dinner time kind of thinking. Lift those thoughts for the sake of the good. And then they can work through that. They can work through that. But if we don't do it, if we don't think, if we wait for some authority figure to come and tell us what to do, nothing happens. And that's what I live for, is to take care of my thoughts and lift them to the best of my ability.
Well, I think you're an inspiration to the folks in the audience today, and it will reach a broader audience than just the folks that are with us today, sharing their weekend with, all of us. And This will go out as an on-demand recording as well, so your message will carry on. Maybe we should put it on Voyager and send it off into the cosmos.
Might be better than what we did send.
That's right. Silly little record. Now, Carl Sagan, wasn't it?
Yes.
Was it immortalized on that record? The gold record?
Yes, the gold record.
I want to leave that on a high note, but I thank you very much. And I think when we do this again, we'll try to engage our audience through chat, and we'll try to do some question and answer, because I think that's helpful for them to be able to get exactly what they want out of these sessions. And I think you would share with me that that's important, that we hit their specific needs.
No, and thanks for doing this, Tony. I really appreciate you throwing your hat into the ring like this.
Well, you're a good friend, and I love to collaborate with you, and we'll do some more work in the future.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bless you, my friend.
Bye.
Okay.